Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction, FUJITA, RIETI. Professor Jorgensen, thank you for the wonderful speech. Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining this World KLEMS conference related to RIETI Symposium. You are so busy, but thank you for giving us your valuable time. My slide will be projected in the English language. However, I shall speak in Japanese. But this is not exactly easy. With the English slide in front of me and speaking Japanese, I don't know if I can be coherent myself. My title is shown here, Evolving Spatial Economy for APAC and the Growth Strategy. My area of specialty, the so-called spatial economics. From that perspective, first of all, looking at Asia and Japan in particular, I shall look at the last decades also, including the spatial transformation of the global economy. Based on that, in the latter half of my presentation, then looking at Asia on the mid and longer term basis, and for Japan, in order to continue mid and long-term economic growth, what ought to be the growth strategy would be my discussion. Regarding RIETI, by way of introduction about the organization, there are numerous activities and projects ongoing at RIETI, but basically there are common viewpoints. That is, to look at the changes in the world economy, including rapid globalization, technological changes across the world, technological advancement, plus what is unique to Japan, this is a demographic issue, declining population plus rapid aging. Under this environment, these are the viewpoints of RIETI, how to incorporate the growth of world economy into Japan's vitality. Second is how to develop new areas of growth. And next is, under this environment, how to create a new economic and social system that would enable sustainable growth for our country. These are the multiple viewpoints at RIETI, and by looking at this, we wish to enhance the productivity and vitality of the Japanese economy and society. The three arrows of Abenomics, in particular, the third arrow, the growth strategy, we are trying to make a significant contribution to the policy. In the half century or so, this is the transformation in spatial economics across the world. In the background, there was a rapid progress in information technology, and in the broad sense, there was an advancement or change in the transportation technology, plus there was the promotion of free trade through different mechanisms. And therefore, in the broad sense, there was a rapid transformation in man, money, and material movement, including financial flow. Spatially, mobility across the world has changed. Transportation cost has gone down across the world. This has caused globalization in production, trade, investment, and finance. Lower transportation costs has caused globalization. At the same time, although globalization has occurred, there is local agglomeration of production and consumption and other activities. There is production, consumption, R&D, which has local agglomeration, which causes a very dense supply chain. There are dense networks connecting these, and therefore this is a highly complex networking across the global economy, which normally is efficient. However, when there is a local disaster or local shock, then all of a sudden this dissipates all over the world, which is the vulnerability. In particular, these days, vulnerability is being identified. For the growth of Japan, for the growth of global economy, efficiency has to be enhanced, but the vulnerability of the interconnected system has to be overcome. Both areas have to be considered and complement each other. Transportation cost has declined, I mentioned. And this shows from the 1930s or so. And this is international transportation cost, sea freight, air freight, and international telecommunication cost. But there was the digital revolution. The information processing cost has gone down significantly. And with the internet these days, it is almost nil. You pay almost nil these days. So in a broad sense, transportation cost, communication cost has gone down. And because of this, in the last half century or so, this is the global GDP and trade. This was an unprecedented growth speed in mankind's history. From the 1970s, on average, GDP has grown by above 3% on average. Trade has doubled from the speed of GDP. It's about 6% growth per annum in terms of trade. However, global financial shock could spill over across the world. There has been negative movement as well, and therefore there has been a shock also every 10 years. In terms of spatial economics, on a broad sense, man, money, and material, finance, transportation costs have gone down. In that circumstance, what would be the impact onto the economic distribution across the world? According to common sense, transportation cost goes down, and therefore all activities could spread evenly all over the world because it would be location neutral. However, that is not exactly the case in reality. The prediction of spatial economic theory is that, according to common sense, when transportation cost is extremely high, the production has to be close to the consumption, which would be highly distributed. However, if transportation costs become sufficiently low, then by using the scale economies, there could be a concentration in a particular location. And therefore, in larger cities, in large population countries, there will be the home market effect attracting these activities. There will be a major agglomeration in selected locations. However, as transportation cost becomes even lower, then it moves to low-wage areas. However, it is not going to be an equal distribution. It would concentrate into a favorable environment. That is the global transformation that is being observed. You may have seen these types of photographs before. In 2012, this was, according to NASA, a satellite. This was the Earth at night. Where economic activities are highly active, it is still shining at night. NAFTA, and on the left-hand side, these are the most bright areas. In the middle is Europe, and on the right-hand side is East Asia. These are the three largest shining places, and India, it is becoming brighter even at night. These focus onto East Asia, this and the North America. The ellipse size is almost the same, but in the broad sense, if transportation cost has gone down in all the places, then this would be the economic clusters. Considering the economic indicators, these would be the economic zones that have to be kept in mind. In these three areas that are bright at night, in terms of GDP shares, how are the activities distributed? Starting from 1980, 1985, in these three regions, including NAFTA, EU, and East Asia. And the top graph are the total. And this shows the GDP shares in the world total, shown on the right-hand side. In 1985, it started to rise, went beyond 80%. In the last 20 years or so, it has been above 80% in terms of GDP shares. Starting in this century, from 2004, it has started to disperse once again. These three core regions, dominated, but then it has started to go out to other places because of the decline in the transportation cost.
非常に高い3つの地域が
These three core areas accounted for the large portion of global GDP, but in particular, in 1985 it was 15% at East Asia. By 2012, EU, NAFTA, East Asia share the same parity GDP shares. In East Asia, there was a big change, which had a big impact onto Japan, which is the GDP shares inside East Asia. The above is Japan in red. The younger generation may not be aware, but in 1986, around 1986, gradually it rose with Japan's growth, but in 1986, the GDP share within East Asia, 70% accounted by Japan. This lasted for about a decade. Transportation costs continued to go down, and because of that, it started to spread into other emerging economies in Asia.
日本が新しい
And Japan did not adapt to the new global system, and therefore Japan's GDP share started to decline. But in the other way, China started to grow. By 2009, Japan and China's share became the same in terms of GDP in East Asia. However, on a longer time, from 1950, for East Asia as a whole, this is GDP per capita, and this is the divergence and convergence. Three phases can be observed. Japan is plot at number 1. Please look at number 1 at the middle of the graph, which is Japan as a reference. Phase 1, 1950 to 1970 on the left-hand side. This is after post-war reconstruction, Japan in the rapid growth period. During phase 1, if Japan was 1, all the other countries in terms of GDP per capita was lower than Japan, which means if other countries' graph are going down, Flying Geese was led by Japan because Japan is constant at 1. Phase 2 in the middle of the graph, with the 4 Asian tigers in the red square. Income divergence occurred, coming closer to Japan. This is from 1970s in phase 2. Phase 3 on the right-hand side, from 1990, the Asian emerging economies, the developing economies started to catch up with Japan. This means that spatially, man, money, and material, information, finance, everything became cheaper in terms of transportation. Initially, there was a concentration, agglomeration in Japan. However, it started to diverge. So these are the transformation that was observed. East Asia is the region considered the world factory. But there are many intermediaries used in production. Intra-regional trade share is indicated. EU. This is almost a single unified area, so very high, but in the case of East Asia, in comparison to NAFTA, it is higher recently. The lower two graphs, Northeast Asia, the trilateral including Japan, China, South Korea, and ASEAN. At the bottom, the share of intra-regional trade is small, but if the two are added, then it becomes double. So East Asia, shown in red. De facto integration is highly advanced in East Asia, combining Northeast Asia and ASEAN. It has been said that Asia is the world factory. So as of 2006, as is shown here, on the left-hand side is the intermediate goods, EU, Asia, US, and the transaction trade between the three regions. In terms of intermediate goods, within Asia, there is a large level of movement. On the right-hand side is consumption goods. Within Asia, the movement is small. What is produced in Asia, most of them goes to EU and the United States. This is the typical story behind Asia being called the world factory. This is 7 or 8 years ago. What has happened as of today? Focusing on the United States and East Asia and the trade between the US are indicated. The top blue line is East Asia's export, including China, to the United States. At the bottom, the second blue line is US exports to East Asia. As you can see, there is a big imbalance between the two blue lines. However, both of them, after the world financial crisis, there was a dip, but both of the two blue graphs are on the rise. The two red lines, the upper red line is China's export to the United States. The bottom red line is US export to China. Again, the imbalance is much larger between the two red lines. It has recovered soon after the world financial crisis. So between East Asia and the US, this is the US trade deficit. The blue line is the US trade deficit vis-à-vis the East Asian economy. After the world financial crisis, there was a little dip, but it has recovered to the track and even much larger than before. And the red is the trade deficit vis-à-vis China. Again, it is recovering rapidly, becoming higher. What this means is,
2008年の
there was the world financial crisis in 2008. One of the causes mentioned was that between US and East Asia, in particular between China, trade imbalance was considered to be one of the cause. And this was often considered the cause of the world financial crisis, but it has gone back to what it used to be. Between US and rest of the world, the trade deficit, it has become smaller. That is because oil price has gone down and shale gas revolution both are the factors which I will not go into details. However, East Asia, including China and the US, the trade imbalance is exacerbating, if anything. This is East Asia as of today, looking at the agglomeration of industry and the supply chain networks, which I will skip. Agglomerations, why do they occur? I will not explain in details. East Asia, after all, is a factory of the world. A huge amount of intermediate passes through this region. Particular industries will be observed. Automotive industry. According to Japan, it's a massive, the largest industry, accounting for 20% in terms of production value. All over the world, of course, automotive industry is one of the largest industry, and this is the global distribution. These are the major regions producing cars. And this look at the volume of production. Europe has been one, followed by NAFTA, and then Japan plus Korea. This was the order. But China, what is surprising is, as of 2000, China production was almost negligible. However, in 2013, China is number one, even surpassing European production. And therefore, China's market is a massive, huge, that is still growing. However, 22.5 million was the volume produced in China, but that's about 26% of the world production. Of course, it is a huge amount of cars produced in China. However, if all the Japanese car makers' total production, that is much larger. It's 26 million by all the Japanese car makers produced across the world. China market is large, but compared with the total automotive industry power of Japan, Japan's power is also large, more than production in China, and therefore for the world, for Japan, automotive industry is the most largest there is an advanced global supply chain supporting this industry, which means behind that there is a high level of vulnerability because they are interconnected, which is observed here.
As you often hear, assembling 20,000 to 30,000 parts and then one car is produced. As you know, in the production of parts and components, there is the economy of scale. And the transportation cost is so inexpensive, it can be transported anywhere. Regarding the key parts, in Asia, in Japan, only in a few places they are manufactured. And tens of thousands of parts and components are manufactured in limited areas. And then, from production to delivery with a very dense network, the network exists in the region and in the global market. And that's one of the characteristics of this industry. And they have just-in-time procurement policy to minimize the inventory. Under normal conditions, it is extremely efficient, but as I said repeatedly, when something happens locally, it could spread in many areas, and this is very vulnerable to major disasters. Now, regarding the Japanese automotive industry, from the eastern part of Tokyo to the western part of Osaka, this Tokai area is the core area. More recently, in Kyushu, southern part, and also in Tohoku, in the northeast part, there are bases for the production. About 10 million units are produced in Japan, half of which is consumed in Japan. The rest is exported. What's important? 60 million cars are produced overseas. The key parts manufactured in Japan are used in the manufactured in overseas production. In NAFTA and in ASEAN, now ASEAN, they center in Indonesia and Bangkok. Amongst the ASEAN key countries, again, key parts are manufactured in one particular area and then they are delivered throughout the region with dense network. As I said before, it's extremely vulnerable as it's shown here in this graph. Left-hand side, you can see Lehman shock. The blue represents the Tohoku. The red represents Japan. In terms of the changes in the total production volume after Lehman, both suffered 50% reduction. The world exports, well, because of the less demand, it's just plummeted. And after the quake and tsunami, again, they suffered almost in the similar manner. The earthquake hit Tohoku, but why Japan as a whole suffered? Of course, there was disruption in the supply chain. And Japan as a whole, there was not much production after the earthquake. I'd like to be very brief in covering the rest. Japan, China. China, in Guangdong, there is a concentration of production in Thailand, in the United States. How they were affected by the flood in Thailand and the quake in Japan. After the great earthquake, you can see that in 2011 it hit Japan, and minus 57% of the Japanese production, auto production. But until March 10th, it was normal. In the remaining 20 days, 86% declined, but they gradually recovered. On the right-hand side, because of the flood in Thailand, again, the numbers declined. So did in China. In April, it plummeted most. Thailand, again, you can see there was a huge decline. The right-hand side, the further right, that's because of the flood. And the United States, especially after the great earthquake, they also suffered. The Japanese quakes and Thailand's flood, you can see it affected globally. And within ASEAN, what happened? And the Japanese quake, you can see that it actually went down Thai, Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines. On the right-hand side, after the flood in Thailand, again, ASEAN as a whole suffered from the decline. So there are lots of vulnerabilities in this regard. And then not just the disasters, including flood, what's likely to increase is political conflicts, possible political conflicts or some kind of disputes. This is a comparison. Left-hand side, in China, we are looking at Nissan, Toyota, Honda. Their sales in China after East Japan earthquake about minus 50%. After flood in Thailand, again, the similar decline because parts cannot be manufactured in Thailand, and that of course affects China. Then the United States, conflict in Senkaku Islands in various ways. Again, the numbers declined for a long period of time and they couldn't recover. So here it says no place in the world would be risk-free. It's not just to be listed and limited to natural disasters, social disasters. Of course, military conflicts must be avoided at all costs, but there are political conflicts and other conflicts, and this could have repercussions worldwide, and these must be avoided. The global cooperation is simply indispensable. Next, about the future of Asia. Asian Development Bank made some forecasts, and according to them, in 2012, Asian population accounted for 55% or 52% because the African population is likely to increase more. But in terms of economics, Asian GDP in 2012 accounted for 30%, with $21 trillion. In 2050, they are likely to account for 52%. So this is about the Asian century. But Asia as a whole, for 40 years, with 5.8% or 6%, it's likely to increase. This is a very optimistic economic growth scenario, but in any case, without major conflicts compared with the world average, more rapidly, Asia is likely to enjoy a rapid growth. But it's not, of course, guaranteed. Asia is described as the world factory today. But they are utilizing huge wage disparity to create this extensive supply. But the Asian development means that to reduce the gap in terms of huge the wage disparity. So new system must be created. Asia as a whole. So how they can become the third core after US and Europe. Advanced production network must be built at the same time, including financial markets, real estate asset market. On those high quality markets must be built. Another important matter is about the innovation network, knowledge production. In various developing countries, knowledge production has become so important in various parts of the world. How best we can strengthen the Asian-wide network in this regard. International cooperation is simply indispensable in this regard. So how to strengthen the supply chain network, making it resilient, responding to the value chain, and the brain power network. How to strengthen the brain power network. Now I'd like to focus on the brain power network. About information technology in the technological innovation in the transport, I talked about the lowered cost of transportation. And then there is a globalization of the world economy. World as a whole, especially in developed countries and also in big cities in developing countries, wide scope of innovation countries are becoming the core of economic activities. In both aspects, major changes are happening. So importers are becoming a brain power society. Now, until 1990s, Japan was the leader in Asia in terms of industrialization. And using the wage disparity in the supply chain, Japan enjoyed a high economic growth in the past. But wage disparity is likely to shrink going forward. What's expected of Japan? It's not a mass production. the innovation in broader scope, the new knowledge is called for. So we need to transform Japan to this kind of a new system. In the past 20 years, this has not really happened, in my opinion, and that's one of the biggest causes of the stagnation. So brain power society. We need to adapt ourselves to this brain power society to enjoy growth. In Nikkei Asian Review, in major countries, innovation was compared to the accumulation of magma and eruption of volcanoes. Government, private sector, R&D expenditure is shown on the very bottom, and the number of patent applications are shown. And above that, number of papers. And the number of papers most cited, top 1%, Japan, China, US, Germany, UK, South Korea, are all compared. Overwhelmingly, the United States is really the core in the world, but both Japan, China, and South Korea are making efforts. But network-wise, they are still weak. Now, R&D expenditure by country is shown here. Very roughly, it's in proportion to GDP. The United States, it's about times 2.4 of that of Japan. For a long time, Japan was number 2, but now China, in terms of GDP, in 2009, it became almost the same as that of Japan. So was the R&D expenditure, but China enjoys a higher momentum. South Korea is making efforts. Number of patents. Japan can be proud of one thing, at least in terms of patents. Of course, not all patents are the same in terms of the value, but in terms of volume, Japan enjoyed the number 1 position. But again, China became number 1, has become number 1. But I think this is the area Japan can be proud of. Top 10% most cited, frequently cited papers. US is overwhelmingly number 1. China become number 2, has become 2. Japan is now flat. Now this is not really pleasing. In this particular time, these researchers really should do more research. But again, China has taken over Japan as the number 2 country. It's really a big issue for us. So what I'm trying to say is this: when you look at the R&D expenditure of Japan, from 2008, it kept declining. It started declining. If you look at the counter business cycle, it's close to 20 trillion yen. Close to 20 trillion yen. Because of the bad economy, if it goes down, that means that it's just like almost the same as the construction industry. This is counter-cyclical, and it spawns negative feedback. It should really be the opposite. As I said before, Asia as a whole, if you look at the innovation activities in Japan, South Korea, and China, they're having very active, but there's weakness in cooperation. The importance of cooperation is not just about individual brain power. Diversity. For instance, in Silicon Valley, there is a diversity of people. That's why they enjoy synergy in Silicon Valley. And from the world over, people from different cultures, they attract people from different cultures with so much diversity, which is so important, and that's something that Japan and Asia should foster. Often people talk about no communication, drinking and communication in Japan, which no communication. And people call it learning by drinking when they are trying to catch up, which is all right. But once you become at the frontier, in the world stage, learning by drinking will not do. No communication will not do. You have to have a good network, and then break the horizon. So you have to have more interaction with the world brain. NIMS, National Institute for Material Science, has been making a lot of efforts in this regard. In East Asia, we are looking at solar cells-related researches. From University of Tokyo, the Professor Sakata created this from 1945 to 2009. He looked at all the papers, international papers, the number of papers, and also the network of interaction. In the solar cells, you can again see on the right-hand side, the United States. This is the biggest base, and in terms of network, the US and Germany, you can see the pipe is thickest, and also the pipe with Japan is also thick. But the core is in the United States, and the core in Europe, that's in Germany. However, cooperation between Germany and other countries is very dense, but in Asia, our cooperation is rather thin, and this needs to be overcome. This needs to be tackled. And lastly, since I'm running out of time, I would like to focus on Japan. Of the so-called three arrows, I'm focusing on the growth strategy. Let me share the following with you. How should we understand this? What should be the approach? The population is declining. For economy to enjoy growth, productivity improvement is a must. It's almost the same as enhancing the productivity. So the issue is how to enhance the productivity. What I want to say is that this innovation everywhere, involving everyone. Everyone must participate in innovation activities. I just would like to focus on three issues in the remaining time. New strategy based on the new values. Not an extension of existing approach, but from new values, new growth strategy must be built. Regarding one aspect, first, this silver is beautiful. Silver means silver. In the United States, they call this blonde. In Oriental, the culture, we call gray hair silver hair. Anyway, silver is beautiful. Second, small and creative is beautiful. Number three, open and connected is beautiful. With this, we want to transform Japan in a significant manner. So first, silver is beautiful. We looked at the flying geese formation in terms of industrialization in Asia. And to emulate that, in Asia Pacific, in aging society, we are looking at the flying geese formation of the aging societies in Asia Pacific. In 2000, at each country, the percentage of the population of aged people over 65. What was that in 2010? And according to UN estimates, UN forecast, in 2060, what would be the percentage of aged people over 65, which is shown in red, 2060. At the moment, it's 23%, almost world number one, and 2060, 40%. And again, overwhelmingly number one in terms of the aging of society. I mean, we enjoy few overwhelmingly number one positions, but this is something we can proudly say, and we are certain that we can keep this position. We should be proud of it. And then those countries in 30s, Korea, Hong Kong, those four tigers in Asia, and Taiwan has not come up with estimates, but it's Thailand, Singapore, they fall into this 30-something percentage. The second category, followed by Vietnam, Canada, China. And then Cambodia, Malaysia, the United States, Mexico, and Bangladesh. In the latter part of percentage 10. In 1960, 20%. And on the very left, further left, India and other developing countries. So we are number one. We will certainly be number one in the future. I mean, we should utilize this position. This is my proposal. Let Japan be a leader of the innovative silver society. Let us all work on this. So how? How are we going to do this? We need to have the re-understanding. Who are the aged? Who are the elderly? Why do we need to fix this dividing line at 65? You look at the men and women, 65 was the average number derived from 1955, but now the life expectancy has increased to more than 30 in the case of women. Why do we fix this demarcation line at 65? What I want to say is, let's forget this dividing line at 65 until the very end of one's life. You should enjoy your life. You should be healthy. You should work, or you should be able to enjoy various activities. That kind of let's create that kind of a new society before anybody else does so in the world. So when I say silver is beautiful, first of all, senior citizens. They can be big consumers, and the big consumers for new products and industries. And senior citizens are big resources. We need to really have this understanding. They're big customers, especially housing, goods and services, entertainment tailored for the aged, and medical nursing services, medical nursing equipment, various kinds of robots, lifetime education, all kinds of resort and services. They're big customers. When you see diapers, you'd think they are for babies, but the production, the volume for diapers for aged actually has exceeded those for the babies, and they are rapidly increasing. So new goods and services are now required. This is just one example. And there are big resources, human resources, as workers, managers, skills, knowledge accumulation, as innovation, creation ventures. 65 years and older. If you think that they are not capable, they're not competent, you are mistaken. Many people, if I may deviate, I was watching this TV program, and the brain researcher, Dr. Morgi, was talking about creativity. And that's the knowledge accumulation times will or motivation. So as long as you keep the motivation high, a person like me, a silver man, can still innovate. So we should really utilize this. For instance, in Japan, Casio calculator in 1969, Casio's calculator was the leading edge at the time. Oh, Mr. Sasaki, Mr. Tadashi Sasaki is the name. He is 100 years old this year. About 10 years ago, a new venture was established by him. And a few years before, he established yet another venture company. So that kind of innovation activities can be fostered by elderly people. We should really promote that. And we, of course, need to think about good matching with the young people. And the international cooperation is, of course, necessary. Now, consumption. This was carried in the newspaper 1 week ago. Increasing share of consumption expenditure by senior households closely nearing 35% in Japan. And this is another example. Gray Bertless, he submitted this to Brookings Institute in the United States. The highly educated people, those people, even when they become aged, they tend to work for a longer time when they get aged, according to this report. RIETI's Dr. Morikawa is engaged in something similar. There's one example. In 1968 in Pennsylvania, I studied in Pennsylvania, and 45 years ago, Dr. Hayashi, perhaps you went there about the same time. In 1968, when I studied abroad in the United States, Professor Jorgensen, he was already professor at Harvard at the time. And then 47 years passed, and Professor Jorgensen, look at him, look at the professor. He's far more creative than I am. Far more creative than I am. 7 or 8 years ago, I was fired, dismissed from Kyoto University, but Professor Jorgensen has been professor at Harvard for all these years. I want to see Japanese system change. I'm not saying that it do it for me. I have already been dismissed, so don't bother. But these silver resources, their competency must be utilized. We do this. We can really enjoy more growth in innovative manner. Innovation for everybody. Everybody must be engaged. Just like Professor Jorgensen, you don't have to be such an excellent professor like Professor Jorgensen. Ordinary people can still be engaged in proactive activities. Just one example. I'm pretty sure you are familiar with this in the Tokushima prefecture. And there is a small village of 2,000 people. This is the village where many people are participating in this project, and 47% of the people are the elderly. And here it says Irodori project, and this is described with all smiles. For instance, you look at this smiling face of this young lady. She's healthy. She is very active. What are they doing? If you go to a very sophisticated Japanese restaurant, then you see all these things, these small vegetable leaves, but they are now shipping these small leaves to 80-something places. They are using IT. They are really at the cutting edge in various forms. They are developing new products. In 1986, the project started first. This 24-year-old man from a town started the project with 4 senior ladies. But now they have 150 members, and average age is 67, mostly female, mostly women. The oldest one is 94 years old. Average revenue per member, 1.7 million yen, which is not too small because it's in the back of the mountains. That means the man and wife and 3.4 million in the mountains. They don't have ways to consume. They just give it, perhaps in some ways, to the grandsons and grandchildren. They are supported by the young people, but they're doing it themselves. Just like Irodori Color Project, in similar way, many people participating. Population is just 2,092 persons. 47% is the percentage of the elderly people, which is the highest in Tokushima. But only 2 persons are bedridden. So what's important here? Medical expenditure annually, the 260,000 yen per year. They are the second. This is only 400 versus 460,000 yen at the village with the second highest ratio of the elderly. So while the elderly ratio is very high, but they are hardly bedridden. They are working in the nature. And of course, at the end, they will pass away. I think this is an ideal. And this is one example of the participation by all the people. So that they can utilize people, elderly people, someone like me. Second perspective, small and creative is beautiful. This is a ranking of Japanese per capita GDP in OECD. What does this beautiful mountain show? In 1970, per capita GDP, we were now 18, and it kept going up. In 1993, number 1 or number 2 here, number 2 depending on the forex. But after 15 years or so, again, there was a mountain, and in 2008, it came back to the same level as before. So we were first number 1 at the leader in Asia, but we couldn't really transform ourselves. We couldn't become brain power society, and that's why the number declined. That Japan declined is not important. While Japan was number 1 or number 2 for 15 years or so, which countries enjoyed growth in 2008 per capita GDP? From the top, number 1 Luxembourg, the triple that of Japan, and then followed by Norway, Switzerland, Denmark, Ireland, Netherlands, Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Austria. Roughly speaking, these are northern countries in Europe, small countries in Europe. They are very small, and in the population altogether, 63 million. This is less than half of that of Japan. So the average is about 6 million people. So what could we say? It might sound like a bit extreme conclusion, but for brain power society, innovation-oriented brain power society, the population size is not really essential to achieve economic growth in a brain power society. What's more important is the following. If you look at these top 10 countries, there are almost all of them silver societies. They are not as silver as Japan is, but still aged societies. But the major part of GDP, for instance, Denmark, Sweden, 7 or 8% is used for education. Japan, only half of that is used for education. And regarding each and every one of the companies in top 10 countries, they are so globalized. And the knowledge-intensive activities alone remain. So in the brain power society, centering on the network, global network, they have enjoyed development. Again, let Japan be a union of semi-independent shining regions. This is my proposal. Of course, Tokyo, I want Tokyo to become stronger, but other regions, I want to see other regions as shining regions. So we love Hokkaido, we love Japan, we love the world. I'm from Kansai, I'm from the Kansai, so we love Kansai, we love Japan, we love the world. In this manner, as a kind of a union, federation, we can develop ourselves. Small, creative is beautiful. So lastly, open and connected is beautiful. As we must achieve economic partnerships, TPP has become an issue. And I definitely would like to see this agreed, and this is something that we must do. And TPP alone will not suffice. We need what we call 2 vehicles of a car, ASEAN plus 6. Asian economic partnership must be fostered as well. So together, Asian Pacific free trade agreement area must be promoted, including NAFTA and including the Pacific. It has to be tackled. And lastly, we must survive as a brain power society. So what's important in that regard is connect or perish. And it's true for economic activities, especially in brain power society. The brain network collaboration is so important. From Nikkei newspaper, I captured this particular picture from 2009 to 2011. We looked at the papers decided in the international journals are indicated to see the interaction, the thickness of the pipe. If you look at this brown, the kind of orangish brown, that's 2009, and blue represents a few years later. Overwhelmingly, the United States enjoys the highest density network. So Germany has the thickest pipe, China, Japan, and of course Canada and the other Anglophone countries also enjoy the big pipe. The brain power network, it's overwhelmingly the US-centric. Within Asia, Japan, China, both countries enjoy the interaction with the United States, but the trilateral relationship around here is not strong. Each individual country is making efforts, but network must be strengthened so that we can become a center of the networking activities in Asia. This must be achieved. China, Korea, and Japan, these 3 countries. Professor Jorgensen. Talked about Motonari Mori, the 3 arrows story. On January 8th in Nikkei, about the 3 arrows. Again, I remember that Professor Jorgensen contributed this article to Nikkei, and I learned so much from the article. Motonari Mori was the great warlord because he was not focused on short-term vision. He had a long-term vision. Japan, China, and Korea. The cooperation is indispensable, yet we are not really getting along very well with one another more recently. Motonari Mori talked about this analogy of 3 arrows, looking at his 3 children. And these 3 countries in Asia, if we could collaborate and cooperate with one another, we can enjoy higher growth in Asia. If these 3 countries do not get along well with one another, Asia as a whole will not fare well. So for cooperation, someone must lead. I just came up with this idea of who I would like to see as a leader in this KLEMS conference, including Japan and China. From the world over, including Japan and China, the talent has gathered. And I think that Professor Jorgensen would be the most appropriate leader, especially in this research collaboration covering Japan, China, and others. I would like Professor Jorgensen to play a role of Motonari Mori. So, 감사합니다. Thank you so much for your kind attention.